Make and Decorate, a podcast for makers who love to sew, quilt, and decorate. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Make and Decorate with Stephanie podcast. This is season 5, episode 95. Today, I have a returning guest, Heidi Parks. And so much has happened since she was first on my podcast back in 2019. So I asked Heidi if she would come back and chat with us about everything that has happened since our last conversation. She graciously accepted my invitation, and we have a wonderful conversation and podcast for you guys. I'm really excited about this, and Heidi is very generous with her knowledge and sharing it with all of us. Well, here we are, back in the darkness again. We turned our clocks back an hour, which means the sun, I guess, comes up an hour earlier, and it certainly goes down an hour earlier, which today is right around 4:30 in the afternoon. It is quite a jarring transition, but I'm doing a little better with that. It's something that I've really been focused on for the last several years after realizing that I definitely have the SAD, seasonal affective disorder. So the things that I've done to help me with that is I know I've said this before, but I'll just mention it again quickly. My countdown to winter solstice, because the day after that, we start gaining our daylight back. The other thing is to take advantage of all the daylight possible before it gets dark. Yeah, and the other thing is to take advantage of the darkness, which sounds weird, but when you make it cozy and you do things like making a delicious hot chocolate, lighting candles, and just really soaking in this new, colder, darker climate. And it also is becoming festive with the holidays coming up. That helps too. And by embracing this darkness that I'd never before, not even last year would I say that I accepted the darkness. This is new. This is very new for me. And I don't know, what will you call that? Growth? Or a new way of living in denial? Yeah. So that's what I'm doing. I am embracing it. And it's only another month and a half until we start gaining a little bit of daylight back every day. I want to keep this Chit Chat segment relatively short, so I'm going to briefly tell you about the Arne and Carlos meet and greet that I went to on November 3rd. And I will definitely go into all the details on the Patreon bonus episode. The meet and greet was absolutely beyond my expectations, and I didn't know what to expect. It was amazing. I had never been to Wool & Company, which is a yarn store in South Elgin, Illinois, and it is huge. It has to be at least 10,000 plus square feet. And it is like a double-story, sort of a warehouse type building, but the lighting they have in there is great, and they have utilized every inch of the walls going up to the ceiling, and they have these large sketches of different types of sheep from all around the world. And they tell, like, these are sheep from Shetland or wherever, and it's beautiful. And these are painted on all of the walls going around the store, in that upper space going up towards the ceiling in just like a large scale. It's just beautiful. I'll put pictures in the show notes. My eyes must have gotten really big when I first stepped into the shop because it was just very beautiful, and it looked like a huge candy shop with all of the different colors of yarn everywhere aligning the walls. The event itself was great. They had catered finger foods and beverages. The Rowan representative is traveling with Arne and Carlos. So I think they're sponsoring these events. And Arne and Carlos is promoting their new line of yarn. It's wool. It's 100% Norwegian wool. I just got some of it, and it is really nice. I have never, seen or tried Norwegian wool, but it's it's dense, but it's soft, and it's got this little fuzzy halo to it. But the softness and easy to knit with, and the colors are very nice. And it was just so nice to actually see Arne and Carlos in person. I mean, it's so weird because when I see them every week on YouTube, their videos, and then I see them in person, it's surreal. But they look exactly the same. So it was a lot of fun. They were very kind, very into this event. I felt like their heart and soul was really into it, which is always nice to see. And they spent time with the book signing and photos with people. And there were 175 people there. So it was a pretty good size event. But more of that in the bonus episode on Patreon. I have a little bit of housekeeping to address, and that is the winner of the George Mendoza Fat Quarter Bundle from Free Spirit. The winner that was randomly chosen is Martha Landis, and I announced this a few episodes ago, and I haven't heard anything. I have sent a message to this winner, and if I don't hear anything by the next episode, I believe I am just going to need to reselect a random winner for this Fat Quarter Bundle to go to. So please get in touch with me, Martha, and I'd be happy to send out this Fat Quarter Bundle to you. All right, it's time for my conversation with Heidi Parks, a returning guest, and we are talking about all new things that Heidi has been working on since our previous conversation. They are all very exciting. She also gives us some tips about hand yoga to keep your hands healthy, I guess you could say, or injury-free. And Heidi, I send you a huge thank you for coming on to my show again, and just for being so passionate about what you do, and for sharing it with everyone, and giving us a glimpse of what hand quilting is today, and how really accessible it is, and how everyone can try it. What I love the most about how you hand quilt is that you do not need all of this equipment, like the big expensive wooden frames, developing and practicing this rocking technique. So I think that it is just a wonderful way to personalize a quilt with your own hand stitching and leave pretty much like an autograph with hand quilting. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Heidi. And also, we recorded this episode very end of August. Heidi mentions an upcoming teaching trip to France, and she opened that up for signups, and it is completely sold out. It sold out right away. So I just wanted to mention that because we talk about it, and unfortunately, it is all booked. But you can still sign up for her diary class that's going to start in January. Take a look at that if you're interested. We are going to have so much fun today. This episode is going to be not only an audio one, but also a video podcast. And I'm going to post it on my YouTube channel, Stephanie Socha Design. I don't know exactly when, but I will let you know when I do have it uploaded. And we're also going to have so much fun because I have a returning guest, Heidi Parks, who is a hand quilt artist, an educator, and a YouTuber. And I'm sure like tons of other things, but we'll start there. Welcome back, Heidi. Hi.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
I am so excited. I've been really looking forward to this for a while. So that is great. And, you know, you were on early on in my podcast back in 2019. I started it in 2018. And since our last podcast episode, your body of work has continued to grow, and with like art exhibits and museums and shows, and your hand quilted art for sale. You've done a lot of teaching. You added on-demand workshops on your website, and teaching events, both domestic and international, and QuiltCon teaching. So that's a lot.
It is. Yeah. And this is my first time being a returning guest on a podcast. And I feel like we will be able to dig into so many more interesting things because there's a lot of basic background information that usually people ask about. And then sometimes it's the same story on a couple different podcast interviews because they didn't listen to all the episodes that I've ever been on. But
sure. Yeah.
So there's a lot of really exciting new stuff to dig into.
There is, and I can't wait to get to it. And the listeners can always go back to my first episode, and then you can definitely hear Heidi's story, which is a really good episode. In fact, I just reposted it actually last month. So it'll be easy for them to find. All right. So, okay, let's start with your hand quilted art.
Okay.
So you've got a bunch of different kinds. You've got small quilts, and I see these really pretty fabric vases, and also, of course, your larger quilts.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways that I have been making quilts. The first way that I was initially drawn to was a 5-foot by 5-foot quilt that would go potentially either on a wall or in the living room. And it's much easier to put a 5x5 quilt on the wall than it is a queen or a king size. And also it's enough space to get an idea across and feel like I'm making something genuinely large. I used to do a lot of painting with acrylics, and big at that time was 3 feet by 3 feet or 3 feet by 4 feet, because that's the maximum size that would fit in my sedan. And if you go beyond that as a painter, it becomes tremendously expensive and complicated. And I live in a duplex, and there are certain corners in the hallway on the staircase going up that just cannot be accommodated for anything larger. So it felt really exciting to me to be so big at 5 feet by 5 feet, but also it keeps the work kind of affordable compared to being so much bigger. And it allows it a little more flexibility. I also energetically liked the feeling of a living room quilt rather than a bedroom quilt. It has a lot of different connotations, different thoughts around its purpose. They're bedroom things, but then the couch things are more in the realm of snuggling or wrapping a quilt around you. And I don't really wrap myself up in the comforter on my bed. It's over me. And so just that three-dimensionality of having something wrapped over your shoulders on the couch is a nice connotation that I like to have in the work. But then eventually I wanted to play with smaller quilts. And I started doing that in 2015 using a wooden frame and wrapping the quilt around it. And that felt like a mind-blowing revelation that I could make something smaller, that it could feel kind of like a painting. The way that I do a border on them, you can see it if you're watching on video.
Mm-hmm.
The piece behind me even has
if you're watching
a border, like a frame around it. So it's not this infinity wrap that I do, but it's a strip of unquilted fabric that you can see visibly around the edge. And that got the price point to a much more accessible place. And it allowed me a little more freedom to experiment and try new things. I was in some ways in a little bit of a creative rut where there were some things I would do and some things I wouldn't do. And by working small, I was able to confront some of those limiting beliefs around what my work could look like. And I started to play with hand piecing instead of machine piecing. I started to play with lines of quilting overlapping one another, which really was more scary to me than having an exposed knot or something, which I think isn't the way a typical quilter would rank their fear factor.
Sure, yeah.
Things. So that was a very exciting development. And then in 2020 through 21, I did an artist residency called the Art Servancy here in Milwaukee. And I made a commitment to spend a lot of time at Lake Park, which is a beautiful Olmsted park. So made by the same designer who did Central Park in New York. I live here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we have this gorgeous park, and I spent a lot of time there. And art servancy comes, of course, from the word conservancy and being environmentally friendly and ethically minded. And for me, part of that took shape in considering vases. I have a recycling bin where lots of glass bottles go. And I also have a lot of habits around the way that I make a quilt. And because generally they have this delicious wobbly edge, if you go to the gallery page on my website and you'll scroll down, you can see that none of them are perfectly square. They all have this nice little slant, but they're still mostly square-ish. And because of the way that I make things like that, I need to cut my batting big enough that it can accommodate that wobble. And then I end up with some pretty significant long, skinny strips of extra batting. So every time I make a quilt, I end up with a 20-foot by 3-inch strip of batting. I had been putting it in a bag in the closet in my storage room, and that bag was starting to burst. And I felt too bad about getting rid of it, but didn't want to make my Franken batting for a full quilt by sewing those to each other.
3 inches.
I mean, that just sounds like such a nightmare. So I then developed the idea that what if I wrapped that around a glass bottle from the recycling bin, created an interesting silhouette, and then used some of my scrap fabric to encase that to make a vase. I also, of course, was out in nature a lot. So I was thinking about flowers and just how beautiful it is to have a flower in my house or to relate to a vase. So the act of interacting with nature, bringing the outdoors in a vase was also probably extra at the front of my mind and interesting. And that's why it became vases instead of soft sculpture or some other iteration of working that way. But now there's definitely an arc of regular soft quilts and then quilts that are stretched on a wooden frame, and then also the vases that have been a really exciting new development.
Yeah, I love the vases idea. And I've always had this love for glass bottles anyway, and when they're really beautiful and pretty, I want to save them. I've used them for flower vases, and my most recent obsession last year had been collecting those wee yogurt jars.
Oh yes, yes,
yeah. And last summer they had this limited edition where there were flowers on it instead of just the plain clear, but so my husband's like, what are you going to do with those? Well, he's using a lot of those right now for like some of his, the screws and nuts or whatever he uses
Oh
for
yeah.
household things. But that became such a phenomenon for that company that they then started making the lids to go on those vases. So now, so now I have dried herbs in some of them. I mean,
Oh
it's just like
yeah.
to be able to
Mhm.
reuse things like that. I love it. It just gives me so much joy. And then when I see your fabric covered vases, I'm thinking, that is so brilliant because it still remains functional
Mhm.
because it's a glass container. You could put water
Uh-huh.
and flowers in it. And I mean, beautiful,
Well, and
right?
you
It's
can
art.
still, yeah, you can still pop the glass
Mhm.
out of the bottom as well. So if you want to wash it, or if you leave the flowers in too long and they get really
Yeah,
nasty,
yeah,
you can just put
yeah.
a different bottle of the same brand inside.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so
I
it's
love
nice
it.
that it's not permanently in there, because then I think washing it would
Yeah,
get really precarious with the
true.
fabric and the sink and dumping things out.
Yeah.
But yeah, they slide out real easily and they're very functional that way. Just hearing you talk about it actually reminded me of Edra Soto. She is a Chicago artist who I know because she works at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where I went to school. And she had an art exhibit here in Milwaukee 4 or 5 years ago, probably 5 years ago.
Mm.
And her work is around walking around Chicago, and she sees glass bottles out in the street, usually alcohol bottles, and they've
Mm.
discarded and they're sitting around and
Yeah.
they're cluttering up her neighborhood. And she goes around with a bag and picks them all up and then scrubs the label off. And then she photographs them like a Morandi painting. I don't remember his first name, but very classic painter, Morandi, who would paint bottles and use these
Mm.
very lovely soft shades that are kind of pastelish, and just makes
Mm.
an elegant still life. And she started to do that kind of still life with photography instead of painting, with these found alcohol bottles. And it just says so much about modern life and walking around, and a desire to make your neighborhood look better, and
Mhm.
to be thoughtful about repurposing. And there's just a lot of interesting richness, both in the very craft DIY, like I made a vase like that to put my pens in, and now my pen holder is cuter. But there's also some really interesting high-end fine art applications for it as well. And I, of course, love things that bridge that gap between fancy art and regular DIY creativity.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and you just reminded me of something I did as a kid. We 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 made pencil cans from um, canned goods, like a can of green beans that was emptied and cleaned out, and we did put um, fabric around it, glued it on, and trim, and it was like a beautiful pencil can.
Yes.
And yeah, so it's I guess it's not a new concept, but I like your idea of bridging the fine art into it because it could stand alone as
Mhm.
beautiful fine art. You've got all of your hand stitching in there, and it we'll talk about this too later, but or we could talk about it now. The it is hand stitching, but it's not just about the hand stitching. It's about your um, vision and your creativity and how you create this art. It's balanced. You know what I mean? Like when
Mhm.
someone looks at a painting and you're like, what is so great about this painting? And a lot of times it's the way the colors are put together, it's the way the light is shown or the shadows. So the same thing with the hand quilting and the textiles that
Mhm.
you use, right?
Yeah, it's because I teach a lot too. And so it can be very challenging to translate for students. What is that edge that makes it really beautiful, instead
Mhm.
of feeling perhaps cheesy or like something you've seen before? And there are several like principles that I often keep in mind and think about. And it's creating balance. To me, having something that's real small contrasted with something larger is helpful. connecting to the elements and principles of art, noticing that difference of pattern and solid that,
Right.
but it's one of those things that's very hard to put your finger on too. And it's the magic that creates
like
an artist's style.
too.
Yeah. Like there's something I still can't define or explain that makes it a Heidi vase.
Well, it's your innate,
Yeah.
You have an innate style, and I can tell a Heidi piece of work, I think.
I like to think.
Although you've been teaching your classes, so I think more and more people are picking up your style, and I think that's wonderful. I think that it's I love it that you share, because, fine art is, a whole world in itself. And just like with me, an interior design can be very snooty toot. And even back 10-15 years ago, designers still, they would never want to share any secrets of how they do stuff or who they used upholstery wise or whatever, and workrooms. And I mean, it was just so closed, tight knit.
Yeah.
No, I'm not letting this go. So, I mean, now more and more they're sharing. And artists too. I feel like it's a similar thing, because I have heard fine artists be snooty and talk about stuff like that, and even condescending toward textile.
Oh,
art.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of that is my origins with making art are around ceramics. I loved pottery. Right here over my shoulder is a little pink guinea pig that I made out of clay when I was in the first grade.
First grade?
Yeah, I was in first grade, and I sculpted this little guinea pig. We had a guinea pig at home, so I had lots of real life experience. And it grew from there. And my grandmother had an art degree, and she loved pottery and had a kiln in her garage. And I would go out to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and visit her when I was in elementary school and junior high, and I'd get to work with clay. And then in high school, I took pottery classes first, and I learned how to throw on the wheel. And then through an artist inquiring at the high school, I became an assistant to a ceramic artist. And I ultimately worked for her for 7 years. Her name's Lori Polpeter Eskenazi. And she just taught me so much about clay and craftsmanship and making. And when I applied and had the courage to go to art school, it was partly because of her nudging me in that direction. And I began in ceramics, and that has a very similar history to textiles of being both craft and fine art. And it's kind of fun being a quilter, because I can look just 20 years back and see ceramic artists fighting that fight around, am I just a production potter making bowls, or am I making fine art? And especially if I incorporate a pottery wheel, or slip casting, does that immediately mean I'm like slip casting a toilet and not some kind of fancy fine art thing? And so having that as a model for integrating and creating a juxtaposition between fine art and craft is just a helpful, I think, grounding thing for me.
Yeah.
That's something I was thinking about a lot back in college.
Oh, good. Absolutely. And just your generosity sharing it, I think, comes back to you, tenfolds. So,
Agreed.
I love that about you.
I love getting to share about making art with other people and making quilts. And I find a big part of my role is in giving permission, in reminding people that they can create their own design, that they don't have to work within the canon. It doesn't have to be a log cabin or corners matching or burying your knots the way a lot of other people did before, that there are exciting things yet to be discovered in what a quilt could look like. And to encourage that, even if you didn't go to demystifying art school is a huge part of what I do when I teach, and encouraging people to have fun and to let them know that they can steer the ship a little more than perhaps a lot of quilters have felt that they had permission to do in the past.
Yeah, and I don't know if art school had this as well, but when I went to interior design school in the first semester, we had to take a drawing class. And the instructor, had to get us out of these constructs that we think about, and we're so like, oh my gosh, I can't draw that. And I remember the assignment, and he just said, just create something. It doesn't have to I don't want it to make sense. I want you to like find objects, find something, and draw them. And try to do it was more like, it wasn't about the composition as much per se as making yourself really reach for your creativity and lose your inhibition of drawing it.
Yeah.
And I was shocked at what I could do.
Yeah, it was very similar for me. We had a first year program, and we had a semester of drawing, which was called 2D art, a semester of 3D art, a semester of 4D art, which incorporated the fourth dimension of time. So we had to learn about video art and sound art and performance art and installation art. And then we also had a free choice semester for these unique topics. And I chose one called Many Hands, which is such an obvious Heidi Parks class to take. But it was about collaborative art and the idea of making something that's a little more generous, or working with other people, or inviting other people to participate and share, even though maybe they're not the ultimate maker, but gathering data from other people and incorporating it in the work. And I felt by the end of that semester that I had completely lost my compass for color. I grew up, and my mother dressed me in pastels in the spring and fall colors in the fall. And my grandmother was very against the color brown, so I could never wear brown clothes. And and all of that fell away. And I remember feeling very confused about color and about how to even dress myself anymore. But also that freedom that I got, that you also were describing, was incredible for making me feel like I just had many more options. My toolkit was so much bigger because I didn't have so many limiting beliefs, especially around color.
Yeah, it was really astonishing to me when I experienced that. And I'm so glad they did it that way, because even if you're super creative, doing something that you haven't done before, or have not had formal education on, you think that you're not supposed to do it, or you can't do it. So, that really opened up, like, opening your eyes. It was so cool.
Yes.
So, yeah. Well, okay. I'm going to move on to your YouTube channel, but I kind of want to get an idea of how long does it take to complete your hand quilted art. So I know size matters. So what about your your little small ones versus how much time do you spend on the one behind you on the wall? She's got a beautiful wall hanging quilt behind her, hand quilted.
Yeah, this one, if you are listening online, you can look up on my website. It's on the gallery page. It's called But What Was It Like? And it's a piece that I layered things. So it's the backing fabric and then batting. And then I put lots of bits of fabric on top of the batting and pushed them around and nudged them. And then I put a single piece of silk organza on top and safety pin basted it and quilted everything down. And it is only the quilting that holds the content of the quilt together. There's no glue. There's no applique. I don't know. I did a little bit of stitching underneath the organza just to be interesting, but not everywhere. So it's held in place with the quilting. And yeah, when I'm thinking about time, I'm also thinking about an arc for the pricing of my work. And I always want to be prepared to exhibit in an art gallery. So I have to have my retail pricing and wholesale pricing so that the gallery might take up to 50%. I generally feel like if I have sold the piece myself, then that's, thank goodness, some money that I can put towards having my website, editing the photos, all of the real true work that goes into being able to sell the quilt on my own. But if I'm at an exhibition with a gallery, I feel like they are very much earning that as well with all the work they've done to put their reputation together and set up the show and all of those details. So working with then a model that the pricing is based on the wholesale price of what it took to make it and all of the materials and supplies, I look at the time that it takes, and also recently had a great experience of noticing that I've gotten faster. And I've always in my mind thought, well, that's how I get a raise, is if I become a little more efficient or a little more savvy about how I'm making a quilt. But when I first began, and I was living in Chicago in 2014, I had no idea where to begin with pricing and figuring things out. So I used an activity tracker app on my phone, and I religiously pressed start and stop every time I sat down to sew. And I found that a 5 foot by 5 foot quilt that was machine pieced and hand quilted took around 50 hours, sometimes 60. And it was a I'm trying to think. I think it was around 30 hours to quilt it and 20 hours to piece the quilt by machine.
Okay.
So that's how I worked out how I was initially pricing things. As I was thinking, if my dream is to not be making so much less money than I made when I was a high school art teacher, which was my previous career, then I want to make about $40,000 a year, or at least price the art so that I could conceivably one day be making $40,000 a year.
Yes.
And so for me, that meant $25 an hour for the wholesale price. And I went through then, and I had a wonderful conversation with a friend here in Milwaukee. His name is Shane McAdams, and he's a gallery owner. And just this past weekend, I had an exhibition in his gallery space. But years ago, when I was talking to him, he was relating to me about painting and quilting, and he's a painter. And so how does he approach pricing? And it was very much about the size of the work and what series it's part of, and not how many hours it took to make that unique, specific piece of work. And that's a signal to the art people, the muckety mucks, that it is craft versus fine art. A craftsperson will often count every single hour, and a fine artist will say, yeah, but I had a dream and that influenced things, or all of the practice and timing that it took to be able to make this minimal thing. So I ultimately moved from $25 an hour to, so far, those pieces that were $25 an hour were $3,000 quilts. And now, as I've started to do more hand piecing and more embroidery and elaborate things that took a lot more time, I would look at that scale and say, well, okay, if that quilt machine pieced is $3,000, then this one must be $6,000, or that one must be $9,000. Or as things get smaller, thinking about, well, what do I want to make in a day? If it's that $25 an hour model, then I want to be able to make $200, or what was it? I forget. Yeah, $200 in a day is 8-hour day. It's basic math. So when I was pricing smaller pieces, like my framed quilts that are 6 inches by 6 inches, that I did start selling on my website last November, and it was just an explosion of excitement to be able to have it be less confusing to buy a work from me, where I was following the art world model and saying, send me an email to inquire about a piece, and then I will share with you about the pricing. And it's this whole complicated back and forth. Now there's just a shopping cart. And if you want to buy something, you can just buy it. So those pieces are $250. And that is, I initially made a lot of them for an art gallery show. So again, I had to be prepared to just make $125 on that piece. But I figured it's a 6-inch piece. It doesn't take me the whole work day, 8 hours to make. And I wanted it to be an accessible price point. So now as I make them, I think about, how does this range in a day? What if I was able to get some other things done that day, as well as finish that piece, then it's appropriate to keep making them and having them cost $250 total.
Right.
So, it's not as much how much time does it take, but how does it slot into that series? But ultimately the answer is like between 3 and 6 hours would be the time for a 6-inch work of art that costs $250. And then as things stack up, for example, this quilt behind me is a $3,000 quilt. It's not a 5-foot machine pieced quilt, but it's layered and has a lot of composition decisions. A piece like this, I have to spend a lot more time doing that artist shuffle of looking up close and stepping back and nudging and playing with composition. And so in that time arc, it felt like, okay, something this size with this method then is in that $3,000 price. So
it's almost like a hybrid that you've got there, which I think is good.
Yeah.
Because it could take a painting artist 15 minutes to create a piece of work. But to get to that point, they had to do a lot.
Yeah.
And I have actually commissioned fine art for design clients, and the artist would charge per square inch of the canvas.
Yes, I've heard of that.
And I got really up there. But, she was a very experienced artist, and her work was, she had her work in galleries in California and all over. So she can do that. I don't begrudge her that at all. In fact, I think it's good.
Yeah.
And it's good for people to value someone's work and art. And because I'm very passionate about that too, about anybody that is spending time doing something. You want to, pay them what they're worth. I want to be paid what I'm worth. And so it's good that you're doing this and that, again, you're sharing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes people need to see. You have to prove it to them because they're not in this world, and they think that I am going to say this, but I mean, if you're a doctor, don't come after me. But I've had doctor clients, and they feel that what we do is nothing compared. I mean, they're saving lives. They've gone through all this education. So they're like, what? It shouldn't be that much. And you're like, do you know how much time it takes to do this and that? And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they don't know. And sometimes they have to be educated. And sometimes when they are, then they get the light bulb and then they get it. But sometimes they don't. So, and if that's the case, they're not your client.
No, absolutely right. And I mean, honestly, I think that's a great analogy. I think quilting saves lives also.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
When I found quilting, it was 2012, 13. That was a terrible time in my life. I was very depressed. It's the first time I saw a therapist. And that's when I made my first quilt, was September 2013. And it just truly saved me. That meditative, reflective process, the fact that it takes so much time and you don't have to every 3 hours think of something new to do. because you're making a 50-hour quilt. It gave me so much purpose and rhythm. And I know that it's just an incredibly meaningful thing to be able to share with other people. But it does, it's hard for people to figure out what does it cost and where does it land. And I often think that things that are historically made by women are also hard to value because women have historically done so much labor and work for free. And what is it worth to go to someone's house for dinner? Is that the same value as going to a restaurant? Or is it more value than going to a restaurant? Or mending clothing, starting to unpack what that costs and how it moves back and forth on the price scale. And certainly childcare is a huge expense and is starting to be costing more than it used to because maybe we're taking things like that for granted a little bit less. But I didn't fully get to, I forgot to finish my story about pricing.
Oh,
and
yes.
I recently, for the art gallery exhibition that I had this weekend, I filmed myself quilting a whole quilt. So I had done applique and lots of embroidery on this quilt. And when I began quilting it, I started filming every step in the process very carefully. And then I also filmed binding it and signing my name. And that part of the process, and it was a relatively simple quilt because as the quilting gets more complicated, it takes more and more time. But this was a straight line quilt, just horizontal lines going across the quilt. So pretty fair comparison to when I had been timing myself back in 2013, and it was taking 30 hours to do the quilting. So including the binding and everything, this took 18 hours. And I was so blown away that I think the binding and signing my name took about 3 hours. So I have cut the time that it used to take me to quilt a quilt in half. It's now 15 hours. And so I love that maybe that's like, maybe now I get $50 an hour to make
right. Yeah.
and that I didn't have to think through every moment when I gave myself a raise, that it just happened. I also have found that for me, it can be very hard to figure out a price. And is it $20 more or less, or just how do you figure out these very nuanced numbers that sometimes folks have? And for me, it's really nice to just say, okay, well, this is a $6,000 quilt and it's like the other ones that are that price. And, or this, that to be able to have them slot in saves me a lot more time. And certainly when I had that conversation with Shane about painting, he shared with me that, sometimes he eats it and sometimes it's a windfall, and that it all kind of averages out in the end. And for me, when I'm thinking about parting with work, it has so much value to me in being mine. Because I teach, I want to be able to have quilts to have a trunk show. Because I exhibit, I want to have enough quilts at the ready that I could have an exhibition of 15 quilts on the wall, and that it would be exciting for people to attend and see. So I'm not in any hurry to have my inventory down to zero. It's wonderful for me to get to spend time with them for longer. So I'm kind of in that long game, looking for a good home for someone who will care about it and not have it in front of a big window with the sun beating down on it all day.
Oh gosh. Right. Yeah.
And then in 10 years, it will be a shadow of its former self. I want someone who will give it that kind of care and appreciation.
Yeah, that is important for sure. Good. So, let's skip around here because we kind of got onto the topic a little bit, but signing your name and quilt labels. So, I've been hand embroidering my quilt labels since my first commissioned quilt was in 2015, and that's when I did my first hand embroidered label for her. It was a wedding gift for her daughter. And since then, she made such a big deal about it. And I was like, this is very special. And the people who will love it and appreciate it, they're going to get it. If they don't, then they're going to get a different kind of label. but I like that's coming back because a lot of quilters just they don't want to do quilt labels, and I feel like it's so important, even if it is just to provide warmth for a grandchild or someone going to college. It's still your work, and you don't know 100 years from now if that quilt's going to be picked up by someone, a collector, and then make its way into a museum for whatever reason. I mean,
Yes, you don't know.
Never know.
We have no idea.
Yeah. So, but you do this, and I think it's great. And I think you actually taught a class on it at QuiltCon, right? Or you are?
So I launched my first set of classes with Creative Bug, and I taught the quilt label class on Creative Bug. So that's how.
Yay. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to watch it because I have Creative Bug.
I know. I'm a big Joanne Fabrics shopper. So I've known about Creative Bug for forever because they mentioned it on the receipt.
Yeah.
Like my favorite leggings that I wear, I sewed those for myself based on with help from the class on leggings from Cal Patch on Creative Bugs. So there are a lot of things that I've enjoyed learning on there. It was really fun.
Me too. Yeah. That's one I've stuck with for a long time. I'm, on and off of Craftsy, but Creative Bug just they're always putting up new content every month, and in all different types of handwork, and I really enjoy the instructors. I made the what do you call it? It's a cat stuffed animal. Lucky Juju cat.
Oh, how cute.
Yeah. And I that was the birthday gifts for all of my nieces this year, because they're at that age, they're still little and they love it. Oh, so cute. But yeah, so Creative Bug is, not a sponsor of mine, but I do like them.
Yeah, I taught the label class, and I also taught a daily practice class. And that's one of the things that I love about Creative Bug, as well as that they've incorporated these daily practice sessions or things just about sparking your creativity rather than here's how you do a specific project, but here's a 10-day daily practice on how you start brainstorming. So it was very fun for me to do a 30-day story quilt class with them. And it had embroidery and applique, and it was just the quilt top, not the quilting part. But it was so much fun to share with them. And for me, that's a big part of why a quilt label matters as well. As I've been, especially since we talked last, really digging into this idea of story and storytelling and diary and memoir and shared history. And when I think about the quilt that I got when I was a baby, my grandmother organized a collaborative quilt, and a lot of the people in my mom's life made a quilt block. And then my grandma sewed them together to make this 16 block quilt that was always at the foot of my bed. It wasn't big enough to be a full bed quilt, but it was the extra layer in the winter so that I could be warm. And when I started to learn how to read, it was this revelation that this thing that had been sitting around all the time just for warmth, that I could look at it and say, oh, that is a Trapunto moose because it was made by my Aunt Becky Moosbrugger, and she put her initials BM on the quilt block. So I can unpack that. Or I love bunnies. It's like, those are my animal. And little did my Aunt Lori know how much I would love bunnies, but she made a cross-stitch bunny, and it said, "Welcome to life, little one," and then had a dash and Lori, and she didn't add her initials or her last name, but there's only one Lori in my life. So I suddenly could go to Aunt Lori and say, oh my gosh, you don't know how much this block on the quilt means to me. And it's that kind of formative age when you're like second, third grade, understanding reading and storytelling, and that it mattered so much to me suddenly what was on the quilt. And I had access to learning it myself and having that moment of discovery rather than my mom like taking up the initiative out of the blue with her 10-year-old to say, hey, remember who made this for you? It was labeled, it was written on the quilt, and it was easy for me to understand who made it for me. And this really empowering moment of being able to figure out and be like a detective and know how the things in my bedroom came to be in my bedroom. So I think especially those moments of domestic quilts and like regular everyday quilts, adding text and writing adds to the storytelling and adds to that feeling of love. I also think just that embrace of my extended family when I was in elementary school. I shared a lot in my quilting as therapy lecture that I do sometimes about that quilt. And when I was young, my dad was an alcoholic, and we had not the best house to grow up in as a kid. Some parts of it were great, and then other parts were really not great. And there were a lot of moments where I was reminded of the support of my extended family, of Aunt Becky and Aunt Lori and Grandma Mimi and these other people who cared about me, where quilts can save lives, and they can really change lives and make people remember that they are loved, and that that's such a powerful thing. And that adding a little bit of hand-sewn label or a little message on the front, like welcome to life, little one, that's incredibly powerful and helpful for people.
Absolutely. That is just amazing. I just to think about it, it's so great that they did that, and that you're so lucky.
I know.
You had an extended family that was able to collaborate with a quilt.
Yeah.
That's it's astonishing, and it's amazing, and I love it. And that's true. I mean, that's why I really, talk about labeling your quilt a lot, because it's really, something that I'm passionate about. Even when I made the Lucky Juju cat dolls, I embroidered my niece's name on the front, right where the heart's at, and did a little heart.
Yes.
And then on the back, on the butt, I signed my initials with the year that I made it.
Yeah.
Because it's important, and my sisters loved it. They loved those. And, they are the ones that said, these are heirlooms. And it just made my heart sing. Because at first I was just making it because they're, it's something easy for them to hold on to, and they can play with it every day. But yeah, they are heirlooms.
Yeah.
Already.
And that's certainly a story of my baby quilt, is me being on the receiving end of a label. I think a really beautiful full circle story of me being on the giving side of a label is that my dad, when I was in junior high, got sober when my parents split up, but there's still a lot of hurt feelings. And around when I made my first quilt is when we put a lot of effort into healing our relationship. When I realized I was grown up enough to realize that he had been trying to fix things and be good to me for a long time, and maybe didn't have all the tools, but we were able to work together and just have tremendous healing that started during that time. And so I think maybe the third or fourth quilt that I ever made was a gift to my dad. And I put a label on it and said, to Dad, love Heidi, it was winter 2013. So 2013. And then 5 years later in 2018, my dad passed away, and I became the owner of that quilt again. And it had the label on it. And I felt so lucky that I could miss my dad so much, because there were other moments in life where I wasn't as close with him. And his ability to transform over life, to break a cycle, and because things like that are passed down. And he's just an incredible change maker and cycle breaker in our family, and someone who was able to become a completely different person throughout the time that I knew him. And you have these moments of like, but did he know how much I loved him? Like, did I say it right? Did I? And to see the proof of that in embroidery on a quilt that I made for him gave me so much peace of mind that even though it was this fleeting 5 years that were so good between the two of us, that I did let him know. And a label can do that and give so much peace of mind that, you let those little ones know that you loved them by putting their name over the heart. And sometimes we can really second guess ourselves of, did I express the love that I wanted to express? And that little bit of physical proof in a label goes a long, long way.
Oh, wow. It's very powerful. And it's interesting to hear it from your end of being on the receiving end of it as a child. So, that's really good to know and good to hear about that. So, all right. Let's talk about hand yoga. We have to talk about this because with doing so much work with your hands and your fingers, it's easy to overuse them and then create problems. And like I've gotten tendonitis, so you actually did a webinar for the Craft Industry Alliance, and I attended that. And then as soon as it was over, I was like, give me the marma stick. So I'm holding up this little carved piece of wood that has all these.
We didn't plan that. I just always have it.
No, the different textures in the wood. The top half has a different texture than the bottom half, and then the little part is smooth. But when Heidi taught this class, and she could talk about it, but you didn't need to have the marma stick. Even though I had to have it, you could use any household item like a pen or pencil. So talk about like taking care of your hands, and you have a YouTube channel called Hand Yoga Club, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of why my sewing speed has increased over the last 8 years or so, as well as just my hands feel better. And part of it is figuring out the right tools. Like there's a rubber gripper that I like to use that goes on my index finger, and it helps me pull the needle through. We think all about the pushing thimble and not so much about, well, how do you get it to the other side with a gripping or a pulling thimble? So having the right tools is helpful, because I used to have, my fingers would be so raw that then I would put Band-Aids on them. And then finally I was on vacation in 2015 in Seoul in South Korea shopping and saw, of course, a gripping pulling thimble. What a wonderful idea. But I had been wearing a metal thimble during that time as well for pushing. And that was squeezing just a little too hard on the interior side of my thimble finger. I use my ring finger for that. And around, I want to say 2017, it got to the point that if I would accidentally hit my hand against something, like not hard, but emptying the dishwasher was kind of a frequent moment, I would feel this incredible pain shooting all the way up my arm to my shoulder. And I didn't know quite what to do about it. I realized I better find a new thimble. And I went shopping at QuiltCon in Pasadena. So I think that was QuiltCon 2017. And I found a new thimble that has a silicone edge. I love the Clover Protect and Grip. And
me too.
That protect part is really, really true. It's a soft edge. So I stopped causing damage, but that alone was not enough to feel better. I had to go 6 months later to an occupational therapist. And Jen was really, really, truly able to help me with my hand. And when I was in for that shooting pain up the arm, I was able to say, well, actually, sometimes I also get some pain in the core of my elbow. And I also sometimes get this little stickiness on my left hand. And I also, I had this whole list of alsos that weren't at the pain point from the thimble, but they were things that were starting to grow that clearly are not sustainable if this is my occupation as a quilter. And I learned a lot from her. And I was also already a yoga therapist. I'm certified in Vinyasa flow yoga, and then I have an additional certification in yoga therapy. So I know a lot about making movements appealing and thinking about marma points, which is like an acupressure point, and ways to balance the body. And I was able to take some of the things that felt like a job in occupational therapy, and I was able to make them feel a little more beautiful or appealing. And I was also just able to think about, how might I incorporate this into my regular day? How can I make it a habit?
Yeah. And I forgot to mention that this marma stick, the point of it is to roll it between your hands, and there's stuff you can do with your fingers. So it's like just like a little exercise tool or therapy tool.
And this tool is from my teacher, Indu Aurora. She taught me yoga therapy. So I learned a lot of that hand massage and why a hand massage would benefit your whole body, not just your hands, from her. But in the hand yoga club, I'm very eager to share information about hand care and different things that you can do for circulation, because all the squeezing and pushing, that you can see that the blood is not flowing naturally in my hand when I'm squeezing and pressing that way. So what do you do to reactivate the circulation if you habitually do things that constrict circulation in your fingers, as well as increasing warmth in your hands or working on knots, the same way you might get a pressure point massage and work on a knot in your back. There are certain places in your hand that might hold tightness. For me, it can be around the base of the thumb. Other people, it can be in this webbed space between the index and the thumb. Sometimes it's even the side of my finger. Over here on my non-dominant hand, there's a lot of gripping, a lot of just holding the quilt steady the whole time. And that gave me what's sometimes called trigger finger, where you can have a stickiness to opening and closing your fingers. So how might you create more flow and lubrication in your hand? And I like that on the yoga channel, I have some, or on the YouTube channel, I have some videos that are 5 minutes and others that are 45 minutes. And there's a big difference between just give me something quick that I can do while my tea is heating up in the tea kettle, because that's all I have time for. And conversely, if you want to sit down and get out a nice, like little bit of olive oil and really go in and relax and refresh and feel rejuvenated like you do after a gentle yoga class, but to be focusing specifically on your hands, that set of options, I think, is really helpful. I also have my most recent video, and it's been a while since I posted it. I've been a little busy with other things, but I made a hand yoga for when you're on the treadmill video. And I love that idea that you could be multitasking. There's also a couch potato hand yoga video that is like 22 minutes long to match up with watching a sitcom. So you could be sitting and watching a show, and I could be on your computer on silent, and you could be doing the moves along with me while watching an episode of something. So I'm always trying to think of creative ways that you could actually incorporate the hand yoga into your life.
Yeah, and I have a bad habit of like getting, doing it and then forgetting about it until something starts hurting. And then I'm like, oh yeah, because, okay, for instance, I've got this, I do a lot of hand embroidery I hold the hoop. And because I was gripping the hoop right here, this started hurting terribly for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, first of all, I was like, I had to take a break from this project.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, it was like, pull this out and really like, but it's so true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any, it's weird because you don't ever think about it, but squeezing anything really, if you do it for an extended period of
Mm-hmm.
time, is not good for your ligaments and tendons and muscles.
Yes. And, the thing that I learned when I was in occupational therapy for myself was that the opposite of that kind of squeezing is not doing nothing. That doing nothing, having your hands stagnant, is a different kind of taxing or exhausting for them. And that what they really long for, if you want to give your hands a treat as the opposite of squeezing, is gentle gliding movements. It's, I think, the most viewed 5-minute video on my channel is just this gentle movements video, because I'm always encouraging people to do it. It feels counterintuitive. You feel like you should have to stretch your hands really hard or press or rub something into them. And in fact, the most powerful, most nourishing thing that you could do, that's the opposite of squeezing and pushing and tugging and stretching and pulling, is a gentle gliding movement. So opening and closing your hands, 70% open to then 70% closed. So you're not moving through the extremes. You're moving in that gentle zone. That's the opposite of squeezing.
I could tell the difference.
It's really,
you're right, because you think you should be feeling something. You should be feeling some pain, or
like you should be pulling your hand way.
Yeah. I was doing that. I was pulling my thumb. I'm like, it's got to be stretched or something. And it didn't help at all. It probably made it worse. Oh, wow.
In yoga therapy training or occupational therapy, never was I told, stretch it as far as you can.
Oh, wow.
It's so counterintuitive to, I think, a lot of American ways of approaching things. I know I've learned you got to go hard or go all the way or do a work.
You have to feel the pain.
Yeah, you got to feel the burn. And
yeah,
in fact, doing something gentle and relaxing is the most powerful thing that I know to do for my hands.
Wow.
There's another 5-minute sequence that I do where I put my palm to palm and just sway my hands from side to side. And then I sway my hands forward and back. And then I twist side to side. And then I spread my fingers wide and closed while still touching themselves, still in that prayer position. And then I stretch wide and return. So just my fingertips are staying together, like I'm around an inflatable ball. And then I do the opposite. I spread my fingers wide while I keep my palms together. And that sequence, there's a poetry to it. It has a beautiful progression and your hands are together the whole time. And for me, that sequence is like the canary in the coal mine. I don't have to then wait till my hand is aching because I've been doing the same embroidery project for a month. It is this little cue that if my hands can feel neutral, like nothing's going on when I'm doing that, I know I'm in good shape and I'm feeling good. If suddenly, that stretch feels so good. Wow. Something is not in the zone that I want it to be, but it lets me know a little bit faster.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. Wow. All right. Well, I'm going to put links, of course, to everything, and the hand yoga will be in there. And you have a second YouTube channel, just Heidi Parks.
Well, technically, it's all one YouTube channel. So it's
is it?
Yeah, it's a playlist called Hand Yoga Club. And then there's other playlists for other things on there.
All right. So you go to the playlist Hand Yoga.
Yeah, but it's just,
and that's where you'll add videos.
/ Heidi Parks.
Heidi Parks.
With an E in Parks.
Got it. Yes. And I didn't know you were doing these videos. So when I was preparing for the show, I watched one of them. Soft Bulk is what it's called. And you that's so cool. Okay, so it's kind of a collaboration,
Mhm,
I think, is from what I can gather of watching it. Zach Foster
mhm,
and Luke
mhm.
Haynes and you, right?
Yes,
It's the three of you, and then you'll have a guest on.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And there's some topic of some sort. So like this particular one, I can't remember his name. He's from Colorado. um,
Oh, with
and
Eliu Hernandez. He works with
yes,
jeans.
yes. And he's a chiropractor.
Yes. Him and I have talked hand care a lot together too.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because I'm like, oh, he probably knows all the ergonomic
Oh yeah.
stuff. Yeah, he works with jeans and denim, and he had this beautiful quilt behind him, made from the waistbands
Mhm.
of jeans. Lots of jeans waistbands, but he deconstructed those jeans, and even Luke Haynes was like, "I never had the patience to do
It's
that."
next level. He harvests the thread so that he can repurpose the thread from the waistband.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah, he was pretty amazing. And each of you had something to talk about, which I liked that too.
Mhm.
And it was, it was over an hour long, but it didn't seem like it just because the flow was really nice. You guys do it on Zoom so we can see everybody.
Mhm.
And Zach had a very interesting thing that I have never seen before with the funeral
Mhm.
blanket or quilt.
Yeah, the burial
I found that
quilts.
burial quilt.
Yeah.
Yes, I found that really fascinating. So check out Heidi's YouTube channels, and there's our videos labeled soft bulk, and you'll always see her, Zach Foster, and Luke
Mhm.
Haynes. And Luke Haynes too is just amazing. His art exhibits, and at first I didn't understand what he was talking about until he showed a video with the camera facing it from the side.
Yeah.
So he has these quilts of people like Obama, for example, and when you're straight on, it looks a little compressed,
Mhm.
but then when you walk towards the side of the quilt and take a look at it, it's completely perfect perspective.
Mhm.
It's amazing. It's like a magic trick.
It
That it's
is.
really cool.
Yeah, and those get to the heart of why these conversations are called soft bulk. We want to celebrate the three-dimensional qualities of quilts and the
Mhm.
things that set quilts apart uniquely as an art object. That there are things that a painting can't do necessarily that a quilt can do. There are sculptural aspects of quilts, and just digging into those idiosyncrasies and kind of celebrating the fact that if I was making 5-foot paintings, I couldn't be making them out of my duplex or putting them into my sedan. But because I make 5-foot quilts, I can toss them in a backpack and then throw them up on a wall, and I can have a show put together in no time without having to rent a
Wow.
van or use any pulleys
Yeah.
out of the window of my home.
Right.
And just that kind of celebration. So we now have a routine where most of our soft bulk conversations are 90 minutes, and we all try
Okay.
to talk for about 10 minutes each, and then the
Mhm.
guest gets a little longer, and then that spurs us into a really organic conversation where the live guests who attend on Zoom put questions into the chat, and they bring up things that maybe we wouldn't think of, or things that perhaps because we're so immersed in it as our jobs that we take for granted and might not realize, oh yeah, that could use some explaining. so so yeah, it's
Yeah.
been a really fun format for me. I always love to do something that connects a little bit with the guest and share how they've influenced me or highlight something unique that we have in common. And other times it might just be someone has a show going on and they want to share about that, or Zach has a project that he's up to. He's been doing artist residencies for the last 8 months, and there's a lot of really good stories to be told around that.
Yeah, and he's new to me. I've had not heard of him until I
Mhm.
saw your video. Luke Haynes, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah, I've
knew
heard
Luke
of.
first as well.
Okay.
And then me and Zach found me on Instagram and we became friends. And then I invited myself over to his house in Brooklyn, New York. And we've really been close since then.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
that's
just
cool. What?
it's the three of us because it's a very natural uh progression. I wanted to become a quilter and I saw Luke Haynes was a quilter and I thought, wow, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. And then about a year in, I reached out to him and said, hey, could we do a collaboration or could we get to know each other? And he said, sure. And so he was just incredibly generous in letting me become friends with him. And then it was kind of the same way at the time in 2015 or 16 with Zach, where I had a presence with my quilts online and Zach was just getting started sharing about them. We had been quilting for a similar amount of time or longer, but he was like, hey, what's going on? And so that direction is really interesting. And even within the last year and a half, we just filmed episode 18 of Soft Bulk. When we began, Zach was still a full-time high school Spanish teacher. And now he quit his job about a year ago and he's been self-employed as a quilter. But we've got that nice staggered. Zach is freshly self-employed. I've been self-employed since 2014. Luke's been self-employed since longer than that. And it's nice to have that arc of experience and the fact that we just were organically, naturally friends who checked in with each other and thought, wouldn't it be fun to share what we do in private?
Oh, it
checking in with
is.
other
It
people.
is so fun. And I've never, of course, I don't know him personally, Luke Haynes, but of course, have seen him around and, talked about and interviewed or whatever. But I just was always sort of a little intimidated by him because his art is just so up there that, I thought, but then when I watched your video, he was a totally different person to me. He was very down to earth.
He's always showing
approachable
bikinis or talking about his dog. It's like little honeydew is up to something or another. What I thought was really revealing, beautiful episode connected to Luke was when his wife was on. She studied fiber art. Now her work is more around her work is in affirmations. So she does affirmation billboards and postcards and just tries to share things that can lighten people's moods and improve the day. And now she's collaborating with Luke to make affirmation quilts that they leave for free in random places, and whoever gets them gets them. And that element of generosity and just seeing what it was, you can tell why they're in love when you see that episode. It's so beautiful.
All right, I have to watch it. Yeah, absolutely. So you guys have been doing this for the last year and a half, or
for a year and a half.
Year and a half. Okay.
Yeah, during the pandemic, we thought everyone's home.
Nice.
Let's go on Zoom and have a good conversation.
I love it. And I think it's really good for you to do that because all of us, the viewers can really see a side of you that we normally wouldn't ever see and learn.
Mm-hmm.
I learned so much on that one episode.
I have about 10 professional lectures that I do, and I got the list of that. But beyond that, there's so many topics I'm interested in, but it doesn't make sense to do a whole. People would just have decision fatigue if I had 25 different lecture options for when I go and talk to their guild. professionally. And
Yeah.
it's fun to show the breadth beyond the thing that's my bread and butter that I make money on. And fun to share about clothing or mending once in a while, or other, to just zoom in and talk about, why is there embroidery in my quilts and what does that look like and how did I get into it? And it really does show a much more well-rounded and exciting scope.
Yeah. And I'm glad you guys are still doing it, because, people are kind of back, not so much in a pandemic phase anymore, but that's great that you guys are.
And it's great to have them as recordings too. So maybe we don't get as giant of a peak number of people attending the Zoom live, but people are truly creating habits and excitement around watching the recording. And that's
absolutely
awesome.
Yeah. I mean, that's out there and it's going to live on. So, yeah. And I think people who have just found quilting or want to know a little bit more about what you guys do, a lot of what you do is like reclaimed textiles and deconstructing and stuff like that. So that's a good source for that too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about what you got going on coming up, and then we'll just that'll be the end of this show.
Excellent. It's so easy to have such a good conversation together.
I know. I'm like, whoa, I got to start wrapping this up because we have to do our Patreon one.
Exactly. I've got my supplies and my camera ready for that.
Yay. So you've got some really good events coming up. So go ahead and share.
Okay. So I was supposed to teach in France to a sold out class in June 2020, and it didn't happen. And now I am getting ready to launch a class in France. It's in a different venue, different subject from what I was going to do in 2020. But this one, I'm thrilled about. It's a 10-day class. We're going to be starting out near Toulouse at Chateau Dumas. And then we're going to all fly together up to Paris and go do some shopping and see Versailles and see the Moulin Rouge. And it's a travel quilt class. So students will be working with me on this idea that I've been growing a lot really since 2019. I traveled to India and I made a travel quilt because I wanted to document how special it was to be on that trip. And now I made a travel quilt in Santa Fe and a travel quilt when I was up north teaching with Zach at Madeline Island School of the Arts. And it's such a great way to document and also to have something to do with your hands. Because if you're like me, you want something to be sewing while you're traveling. So in France, we will be doing a travel diary quilt top together. And then the students will also have access to my on-demand hand quilting class. When they get back home, they'll be able to hand quilt it with me online and have that support.
Oh, that's so cool. I can see why you're really excited about that.
I love
that's pretty amazing.
I'm such a Francophile.
I need to get over there. I haven't been yet. I really, really need to. I want to go there, and there's places in England I want to go, and Italy, and oh my gosh, it's just and then the pandemic really
it was not good for my lifelong dream of getting to teach quilting in France.
Oh man. Okay, so you're doing that this coming month in September, right?
So it's the classes in 2023. So we are we're launching it. We're about to start selling it and revealing all the details. And it's crazy how
because I was gonna say, how did I miss that?
Yeah, no, you really have to plan in advance in this industry. The spot quilt episode that we did last month was with Libs Elliott, and I just shared my to-do list with everyone. I was like, this is how far in advance I'm planning things, and this is what my day looks like when I'm structuring stuff. So right now we're planning, and it's going to be all ready for people to start signing up on October 1st of 2022, and then we will be flying to France together in 2023 September. So quite
We
the
are
lead
recording
time.
this August 30th, but the episode is going to go up sometime between late October, early
Yeah.
November. So that will be perfect
Yes,
timing
it should be really
for
perfect
people to
timing.
sign up.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. And then you have something else coming up.
Yeah, I'm also going to be launching an online diary quilting class. So similar to the travel quilt, but just a diary of anything you want. It doesn't have to be a diary of a trip. It's going to be a live Zoom class, and we're going to meet 4 times in January. It will be with a limited class size. So we'll have a max of 40 students, and I'm going to do a Sunday session and a Tuesday session. And the first week, I'm going to have Janelle Hardy as a guest for us. She's an expert in memoir and writing about memoir. In the last year, I have decided to dig deep in understanding why is storytelling so interesting to me? Why is the story quilt such an endearing, just ubiquitous thing to make? Why does it matter? Why does me making a story quilt matter? Why would it be valuable for someone else to do that? So she's going to talk to us a lot about memoir. She also does body-based memoir writing. So she has a lot of wonderful techniques for grounding into your body, for thinking about gravity, for language around even blood. I took a free workshop with her recently, and she was talking about blood brothers and blood, like, I can't even remember them off the top of my head, but all the words connected to blood and how that invokes storytelling and things that might be interesting to use as a grounding force in a memoir. So the first week of the class, Janelle is going to be guiding us and helping us understand and think about what is a diary quilt, what kind of stories might we want to tell or watch for, or how can we train ourselves to be more observant. And then the next 3 weeks, I will be guiding students in choosing their own story to tell. So we're not going to be making identical diary quilts. They'll have options to make something in real time about 2023. They'll have the option to look back at 2022, or to maybe look at a particular archetypal story that they keep repeating. Right? Like sometimes when I'm dating, you can find you're dating the same person over and over again, even though they have a different name and a different body.
Yeah.
So like, why do you tell that same story again and again? Or why are you drawn to the same person? So maybe over time, we can dig into this diary story that keeps coming up for you. But I'll be sharing different ways of working with diary, different techniques that could be helpful, different metaphors in the stitching, in the materials, in the types of fabric that would add to the diary. So that I'm really thrilled to be able to teach live in January. And then I'm hoping to launch an on-demand version of that class in February. The on-demand classes, I've got a lot of them already. I've got 6 different classes on the bases that we talked about, on the 6-inch by 6-inch framed quilts, hand quilting diary class, a scrap quilt class that is probably the one I'm the most proud of. I love that scrap quilt class. So the diary quilt will be the 7th on-demand class that I'll be launching on there. And you can take that whenever you want and work at your own pace, your own speed. So it's an evergreen thing that you can do with me, the same as maybe you're listening to this podcast in 2027, well into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, wow. That's exciting. And I think January is the perfect time to have an online class because I took one last January and I didn't even realize how much I needed that, because you don't realize the holidays just take so much out of you.
They do.
You know? And then, after the New Year's, and I was sick and all this stuff. So I took this online workshop, and it was, K-Facet.
Oh, yes.
With Quilt Folk. Oh my gosh, it was just amazing. And then I was just like, wow, that is a really good time of the year.
Yes.
to host a workshop or a class. So good.
Yeah,
good.
I find January through March, even into April, that's the moment where people want to take quilting classes. And I try to be ready for that.
I think you're right.
Aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, cool. All right. So we'll put links in the show notes, and I'll put links where everywhere you can find Heidi Parks, and she's very consistent. Everything is called Heidi Parks, I think.
If you can spell my last name, you can find me.
Parks with an E. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming back. And I mean, it's funny because it's almost like having you for the first time, because there's just all this new stuff to talk about, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Yeah, and it'll be fun even if people listen to the 2 episodes in reverse order. So if they heard this one first, you can go back and get a lot more.
That's a story in itself. You know, the story from 2019, and now we're in 2022, and the evolution and growth of your work. Yeah, amazing.
You know, I think it's partly the diary aspect of the work and memoir, and there's a self-help feeling in the work, and that leads to a lot of personal growth and things changing really quick.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to leave it right there. Thanks.
Oh, that was so much fun.
Yay! If you would like a bonus episode every month, become a patron and support the Make and Decorate podcast show at my Patreon page, Make and Decorate. For extended show notes with links and photos to what we've talked about, visit my podcast blog at makeanddecorate.com. And remember to take some time for yourself to be creative. Bye-bye.